This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Philadelphia to Erie and from Scranton to Pittsburgh, it's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewalt, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined by my colleague and my co-host, Maura Donnelly. Welcome, Maura.
Hello, Charlie.
Maura, we have a date coming up here. The second week in April is National Crime Victim Rights Week.
Yes.
And we want to acknowledge this by exploring some of the initiatives that are going on right now in regard to crime victimization. And to do that, we have two wonderful guests with us. We have Senator Guy Reschenthaler. Help me out, Guy.
I say just call me Guy, but it's Reschenthaler.
Reschenthaler, thank you again, from the state Senate, and who is now running for?
I'm running for PA 14th, a newly created district in the southwest corner of Pennsylvania.
Of the United States Congress.
Yes.
Okay. And we have Jen Riley with us. Jen is on leave from the Bravo Group here in Harrisburg and is serving as the executive director of the Pennsylvania State Directors of Marsy's Law.
That's right. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Well, I hardly know where to start because we have so much crime in society right now, and there's certainly a lot of victims out there, and the victims need more help than we've been giving them. What started this initiative that you're heading up, Jen, and what does it hope to do?
Sure. So Marsy's Law for All is a national initiative that started in California. So the founder of Marsy's Law, his name is Dr. Henry Nicholas. His sister was tragically murdered. And a few weeks after her death, Dr. Nicholas and his mother were visiting her grave. And then afterwards, they went to the grocery store and they ran into the accused without knowing that he had been released on bail. And so this sparked an initiative from Dr. Nicholas that no crime victim should ever have to experience what he and his mother went through. So he started Marsy's Law for All. Right now, Marsy's Law is in 10 states and has already been passed in 5. So we are making our way to Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania just happens to be one of those stops.
Senator, what attracted you to this particular initiative?
Well, the National Marsy's Law Project contacted me, and I believe what drew them to me was my background. So I was a prosecutor in the Navy, I was a defense attorney, I was a district judge for a period of time, and I did work for victims when I was a district judge. So it was a natural fit, and it's something I'm very passionate about.
Oh, that sounds great. So you know, we hear a lot about the criminal. Criminals have rights. There's laws, numerous laws, constitutional protections for criminals. What does Marsy's Law do for the crime victims?
Yeah, so there are constitutional protections for crime victims, as there should be, right? Those constitutional rights are there for a reason. What Marsy's Law does is simply elevate victims' rights to that of the accused or convicted. So it does not diminish the accused or convicted rights, it just elevates.
So that people won't run into them in the grocery store.
Right.
So what is it? I mean, is it just a notification that they're out?
That's part of it, right.
Yeah.
So what Marsy's Law does is it provides the right for the crime victim or survivor to be heard, to be present, and to be informed. So in Pennsylvania, we have great crime victims laws already on the books, already in statute, and already practiced in common law. So Marsy's Law simply elevates those rights. There are some states that aren't as fortunate as crime victims are in Pennsylvania. Some states don't have those rights. We do. We're just now going to elevate them.
And when you say elevate them, you're talking about putting it into the Constitution.
That's right. So right now those rights are in statute. And so by elevating those rights to the state constitution, there is a level playing field here in the criminal justice process.
Senator, do you think it's worth it to go through the entire 2-year process of creating a constitutional amendment And how do you think that's going to make a difference in terms of enforcing the crime victims' rights?
Right. Well, unquestionably, this is worth it. So to put the rights of victims on equal footing with that of the accused is necessary. And just the nuts and bolts of Marsy's law, these are, I know Jen was talking about previously, but we need changes now. So in the courtroom, sometimes I would see a victim wanting to confer with a prosecutor and not having the ability. Sometimes victim impact statements aren't all brought into court because they're viewed as what we would, as lawyers would say, is cumulative evidence. This amendment is going to put all that to the side and is going to give victims the right to be heard, of notification, to confer with prosecutors. That's absolutely needed, and it's time we put the rights of the victims on equal footing with the rights of accused. And remember, with the whole criminal justice process, the one person in the courtroom that did not choose to be in the courtroom is the victim.
Right.
The fact that we don't have constitutional provisions for the victim who is dragged into the system is just beyond me, and it's time that we fix the problem.
Well, Senator, when we look at the statistics in 2015 alone, the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency said that there were in our Commonwealth 40,000 violent crimes and 845,000 crimes overall. That's much greater, I think, of figures that are much greater than the general public would realize. So your proposed constitutional amendment would ensure crime victims which specific rights? Could you go down through a list of them jointly?
Yes. Yes, there's enumerated rights. We could start at the beginning of the proceedings. So the right to be heard at any kind of pretrial motion, any bond hearing, the victim would have the right to talk and give the judge the opinion. Then as the proceedings progress, the right of notification when the hearings are, the right to be present at those hearings, the right to be heard at those proceedings. And I think probably the most important part of this is the right to confer with the prosecutor. Right? A lot of times the victims just simply want to talk to the prosecutor and they do not have the ability to, just because of judicial economy, right? It's a busy courtroom, there's a lot of cases going through. This will say, no, you as the victim have a constitutional right to speak with the prosecutor during all the proceedings. Then at trial, the ability to be heard, and then after, the ability during sentencing to be heard on the impact that the crime had on the victim, and then any kind of parole hearing, the right to give a statement about what the release of the accused would mean to the victim, and throughout the entire process, the right of notification of release or escape. So these rights, although a lot of them are provided in statute, it's time that we put them on equal footing with the right of accused and have them provided for in the Constitution.
So right now they're left to the discretion of the prosecutors. If there's time, we'll let you do this. So it's not really giving them those sorts of protections.
The problem is when a judge is balancing rights in a courtroom, and as a magisterial district judge, I was there when this is happening. You have constitutional rights of the accused, you have statutory rights of the victims. It's time that we put both the rights on equal playing field so the victim is just as protected during proceedings as the accused is.
Okay. That makes total sense.
It does. And a lot of times, like the senator was saying, victims' rights right now can be missed during trial just because of a mishap or time's sake. It's not anything malicious most of the time, and so with this there will be recourse for a victim. Right now, if their rights are violated, there is no recourse.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Jen, could you give us a quick capsule summary of sort of the forces that are aligning with you behind this to try to push it over the goal line?
Absolutely. We've gotten great feedback from victims and survivor groups. So currently, right now, on a statewide level, we have the Office of the Victim Advocate behind us. We have the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, or PCAR, and the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence supporting us. In addition, we have law enforcement, we have the Pennsylvania DA's Association, and we have crime victims across Pennsylvania looking to speak out and talk about their stories.
Where can our viewers go for some additional information about the whole project?
Sure. We have social media, of course, so Facebook and Twitter, and it's all under marsyslawforall.com.
Okay, well, we want to thank you for joining us today to talk about this very important issue that, again, a lot of us overlook and don't know as much as we should about it. We'll be right back with the second segment of Behind the Headlines. We'll be right back.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Hi, welcome back to Behind the Headlines. Maura and I in this segment are fortunate enough to be joined by Ken Mash, the president of ABSCUF, the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties. And Ken, welcome back to the show. Why, we invited you back to the show because of this pending decision that is being considered in the United States Supreme Court that we've talked about briefly before, the Janus case. Do you want to tell remind our viewers what the Janus case is all about, Ken?
Sure, Charlie. Maura, it's great to be here again.
Nice to see you, Ken.
The Janus case is a challenge to what we in Pennsylvania call fair share, and other places they call agency fees. It's a requirement really under the terms of contract that those people who don't want to be full members of a bargaining unit for public sector employees still pay fair share. That is the costs of representation and the other services that the union is required to provide.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Supreme Court is now considering this case brought by a gentleman, I forget which state it was from, Indiana?
Chicago. Illinois.
Okay. Illinois. I had the right state. And but there's also a Pennsylvania case too that's been sort of put on hold until Janus comes out.
There are multiple cases that have been out there. There's a number of groups who are funding these organizations, funding these plaintiffs to bring cases against public sector unions. There's been a move out there by these organizations, a concerted effort to attack public sector unions in many different forms. And this is one that's been going on for a couple of years. There was, of course, the Friedrichs case the year before, and the court ultimately wound up split because Justice Scalia passed away before there was a decision rendered. So a different case came up, and now it's being argued.
So on a previous episode, we had somebody from the Fairness Center in, and they were in support of the agency fees being shot down. And they had filed an amicus brief, and that's why we wanted to have you today, because there are two sides to every story. And so why don't you walk us through sort of what the union position would be, in its strongest sense. Why do they want the law that's been in place since in the 70s to be upheld?
Well, I mean, I think it's just a basic issue of fairness. That is, that the union is required to negotiate on behalf of all the employees who are there. We are required to represent people should they wind up in trouble or in some way or another in a grievance situation. The unions are required to represent them. My organization, for the most part, at least on the first level of things, is staffed by volunteers. That is, colleagues who would then be required to go and defend people who don't even pay anything towards that service ultimately and for the organization. From our perspective, look, this is the government sort of contracting out services. They do so in these cases to our association, in our case, but for unions to negotiate for everyone. It saves them the costs of having to negotiate individually with people. It saves them the costs of having to have dispute resolution systems within their association. And also, from the perspective of municipalities and states, I know that the Solicitor General of Illinois argued, New York City argued in its brief too, that ultimately this contributes to labor peace. that in New York at least, that there were regular strikes by public employees until they had agency fee. And with agency fee, things calmed down. So it's, for us, it's just a basic of idea of there will be a group of people, in this case, comes down on the side of Janus, there'll be a whole group of people who can free ride, that is, get the benefits of being members without having to actually pay anything at all for it, and therefore drive up the cost for everybody else to be in the association, because everybody else has to cover them as well as themselves.
Ken, I have two big areas that I'd like to explore with you, and let Mara interject between them. But the first area is agency shop is well-settled law in Pennsylvania and other states. This is nothing new. This has been the situation for a long time because it addresses a issue brought up by Manker Olson in an award-winning book called The Logic of Collective Action. And in The Logic of Collective Action, Manker Olson says if you have a situation where you can pay to have something done for you, or you cannot pay to have something done for you, you'll always choose not to pay and have it done for you.
Human nature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it is so unfair to expect an organization to process grievances for you and to do all of your bargaining for you for wages and for benefits, and not expect to pay anything for it. So that's why we have agency shop, so that if you have a tremendous bias maybe against being forced to join an organization, you don't have to join the organization, you just have to pay for the services that you're being rendered. That's why this whole litigation is quite surprising to me. I thought this was settled a long time ago, Ken.
Well, we did too. Well, I think what we've seen is, as I was referencing before, is these organizations who are anti-government, generally anti-union, funding plaintiffs, that is, searching out for plaintiffs who are, if you look at all the unions, they're really in the minority as far as people who don't want this, but searching them out in order to be able to construct an argument, in this case, a First Amendment argument, saying that they don't believe in the union, why should they be forced to join? But there are a lot of circumstances where you're sort of forced to do things, and the government can require you to do it. For example, with healthcare, I'm required to pay into my healthcare by the state and by my employer. But what if I don't agree with what the company that's providing what the healthcare does otherwise? That is, their politics. If I disagree with their politics, do I then not have to pay for that? I guess I could opt out of it, opt out of healthcare entirely, but then I don't get the healthcare. In this case, you opt out of it, but you still get the services that the union provides. This is really a clever attempt to destroy unions. That is, they understand that they will be driving up the costs for everyone else. They create an option for people where you either pay nothing at all or you pay the full union dues. Therefore, just by self-interest, you'll have people saying, hey, why should I have to pay if these other people are not paying? And that will ultimately undermine unions generally, public sector unions. And the same argument that's being used for public sector unions, people ought to be aware that that argument is also being pushed for private sector unions too. That is, if it's not okay for the government to say you have to join when they have a closed shop, that doesn't just apply to public sector unions. You could then stretch that out or try to make it also apply to private sector unions. It's a very complicated issue on one level, but it's also not complicated on another issue, on another side of it, because again, we're talking about driving up the costs for people, making people work for those people who are giving nothing back in the end. And again, this is an attempt to try and destroy public sector unions. But
Will they be destroyed?
No, I don't think they're going to be destroyed. I think ultimately what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of pushback against this. And some people have even said, look, because what really doesn't make sense in this case is that this would truly be the first instance in which the court is asserting that public sector employees have First Amendment rights in their jobs. in a whole series of cases over the last dozen years, the Supreme Court has severely limited the ability of public sector employees to have free speech rights. And this would stand out as an anomaly to that. But then you could also question, because we have a whole bunch of states who say that public employees can't join unions and they can't negotiate. Well, if you have First Amendment rights as a public sector employees, and that involves association, what right do those states have to say that you can't join a union and that you can't say that you want to be a part of that association? So, I mean, I think it could really open up a nightmare for people when you start looking at people who would want to stretch this out.
Ken, the second area I'd like to explore with you is one that the general public doesn't have a good understanding of, in my view. Full disclosure is that I am a member of ABSCUF and have been a member of ABSCUF during my whole employment at Millersville University as a professor of government there. But you find that the union, in this case, protects the normal rank and file individual, the normal rank and file professor, from the somewhat ineffective, bumbling efforts of our professional administrators, educational administrators, to try to run the state system and any other college or university. The public believes that they look at the faculty and they think, it's really they're so lucky to have these administrators to guide them and to run the institutions, when in fact educational administrators are one of the least qualified sections of professionals in America. They are people who don't want to be in the classroom. They are people who have been in the classroom and they've failed, so they try administration. Or they're people that search for power in some setting and they can't find it in any other, so they find it in education. I'm sorry, that sounds very harsh, doesn't it?
A little bit.
But that is my experience. I have been sort of run into administration time and time again when they've made mistake after mistake after mistake, and the union is more well-informed and is better prepared to help them run the system than they are. And we run into this over and over again. I know you've run into this in statewide negotiations where the figures, for example, that are being brought to the table by management are wrong. And we have correct figures in many instances, the union does.
Yeah, well, I mean, what important part of what unions do is they provide a countervailing force. When it comes to, when the kind of thing that you're alluding to, where somebody might be a target or thing like that, the union guarantees that at least when an administrator is trying to, discipline a professor in our case, that at least they have to have cause for doing so, and that they follow the procedures that they have to follow before they go ahead and they take action. We also want to bear in mind too that there's often a lot of talk when we're talking about this right of association that people don't agree with the politics of the union, or they don't agree with the candidates that are endorsed. And people don't understand that the reason why it's fair share is because the government activity that the associations are involved with, we're not charging those fair share members for that government activity. And if it comes to giving money to candidates and campaigns and things like that sort, that's an entire different pool of money. You can't use union dues of any sort to contribute money to candidates. So, there's often this argument put out there, which is a red herring, because that's just not the way that it operates. But you're right, Charlie, it really is important to have a countervailing force, that is groups of the employees who could speak up and say, look, there's an alternative way of looking at this, or perhaps you need to pay attention to some of these errors that are sometimes made by administrators.
So what's going to happen if Janus comes down and it's not in favor of the unions? What will be the next steps for unions?
Well, most people I know believe that, in fact, that's what's going to happen.
Oh, okay.
Justice Gorsuch is a pretty conservative justice.
But apparently
and
he didn't say one word.
He didn't make a peep,
and
of course we would be pleasantly surprised if he didn't do that. But ultimately what happened is that fair share will go away And we will make the case like we always make the case. You know, we are among our professors who are full-time professors. Our membership is in the high 90 percentile. So we believe we're doing a good job. We just did a survey which shows that our members believe that we do a good job representing them. We will carry on, and we will carry on understanding that we have to be more active. And again, I want to bring it back to that point that I made earlier, that there's dangers to doing this too, and that you could wind up with additional labor strife there too. Because usually to get these provisions in there, unions have traded away the right to strike in instances, and if that goes away, then you're likely to see more strikes.
Ken, you are we have to wrap it up now, but
Yeah.
Ken, you are a Supreme Court authority and a scholar, and you know how unpredictable Supreme Court rulings could be. Look at Justice Alito and the rulings that he made recently on the congressional maps in Pennsylvania. No one expected that. I think that I wouldn't want to bet one way or the other on the Janus case because of Gorsuch's silence. I don't know how it's going to turn out. But Mara, about 5 years ago, our administration said, "Oh, we overpaid you by $10,000," and they said, "We're going to take $10,000 out of your pay over the next year," and they were wrong, and it was only the APSCUF that came to my defense and prevented that from happening.
Wow.
So that is, I think, a great example of how APSCUF can make the system more accountable and more effective and efficient. So, Ken, we're out of time. 30 seconds, last word.
Well, you know, again, public sector unions will not be going away. In fact, I think that they will be motivated to work even harder to spread it across the state and to the country, what the importance of unions are, including the great work that's done by all of our unions, you know, fighting for things like minimum wage and for workers who are not even part of the union. So, you know, I look forward to the future.
Okay, on that word, thank you very much. We will be back next week with a new edition of Behind the Headlines. We'll see you then.